honor to be invited today, and I want to thank the organizers of today's African Peoples Summit on the AU-EU partnership, and congratulate the organizers and everyone attending on such a successful People's Summit. This degree of organizing and solidarity across so many different communities is an inspiration to people all over the world. It's not surprising to me that the peoples of Africa are leading in this way. As a UN Special Rapporteur, I'm an independent expert that regularly reports to the UN Human Rights Council and the UN General Assembly. The key point here is I'm independent and I can speak freely based on my research and regular conversations with governments, international organizations, other experts, businesses, and civil societies. It is my job to be the eyes and ears for the UN system and address questions of hunger, famine, and malnutrition from a human rights perspective. It is unfortunate that delegates from the AU and the EU were unable to come today. But in the least, I can tell you I've heard you today, and I've heard and received today's powerful declaration. And my remarks were originally today about making sure that the officials from the AU and EU heard you. What I will do is continue to look for opportunities to amplify this declaration, to repeat this declaration, and to direct the attention of the officials towards the people. So what I'll do today is reflect back to you what I've heard and in the spirit of a continued relationship with everyone here today. So what I'll do is I'll first describe what is at stake in general with the EU-Africa partnership. I'll then discuss two specific topics, investment and land. And I'll conclude with how a human rights framework and a focus on agroecology can provide a viable way forward for everyone. So first, what is at stake here is European and African relations, to say the least. Europe and Africa have had a long relationship. And unfortunately, this relationship has been mostly defined by colonialism. Europe needs Africa, and they forget that sometimes, just as Africa needs Europe. But the relationship has unfortunately reflected long-standing power imbalance. Today, those power asymmetries continue even as the relationship continues to change, even as the distinction between European peoples and African peoples gets blurrier with every generation. What everyone recognizes is that the EU-Africa partnership is an opportunity to transform the relationship between the continents so that it can become a relationship of equals. COVID-19 highlights the limits of a relationship that is not based on trust. I welcome the recent commitment by the EU to increase spending to boost vaccination in African states that were lagging. Even though more than half of the world's population has been vaccinated, 84% of Africans have yet to receive their first dose. However, the fastest way to get vaccines quickly to everyone who needs it is to pass a TRIPS waiver at the WTO. And yet the EU continues to block the TRIPS waiver at the WTO. The EU continues to block the fastest way to get vaccines to African people. The EU should therefore not continue a relationship with Africa as one between donor and recipient. The relationship between the continents should instead be a relationship based on listening to what people are asking for and responding to their needs. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic has also triggered a global food crisis, and yet there remains no multilateral response to the food crisis. How we respond to the current food crisis during the pandemic will be what, in effect, determines the future of our food systems for decades to come. So what is also at stake are people's food systems in Europe and in Africa. The biggest threat to our food systems is the drastic reduction of biodiversity. Around 1 million animal and plant species are now threatened with extinction, many within decades. Food systems also emit approximately 1/3 of the world's greenhouse gases. And the main instigator behind biodiversity loss, soil degradation, and greenhouse emissions has been industrial intensive agriculture. This type of practice relies on high input, high output agricultural systems dominated by large scale specialized farms. Ever since governments started adopting the so-called green revolution in the 1950s, the world's food systems have become increasingly designed along industrial models, as if land was a factory. The idea being that people should purchase industrial inputs and fertilizers and pesticides so that they can produce large amounts of food. But here, productivity was not measured in terms of human and environmental health, but it was measured exclusively in terms of commodity output and economic growth. This economic model that accompanied the Green Revolution created food systems that disrupted carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus cycles. This was because corporations were forcing farmers to depend on fossil fuel-based machines and chemical inputs like synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, displacing long-standing regenerative and integrated farming practices. Moreover, more and more power in food systems was concentrated into the hands of a few transnational corporations. Food systems have been designed to serve profit margins over people's rights. The fast-growing consensus and what we've heard today is that we can no longer rely on paradigms that prioritize economic growth and these outdated economic models. So this, having described what is at stake, let me turn to some of the substantive issues. The first being investment. Investment will be at the heart of discussions at the EU-AU summit. Going in, I think all the leaders need to recognize and understand the current investment landscape today. Investment law is in a moment of crisis. For too long, investment law has given foreign investors more power than host governments and local governments. For too long, investment law has been allowed to violate people's human rights. This is why the whole area of investment law has been fundamentally challenged. And as a result, investment law today is in the midst of a transformation all over the world. No one knows what investment law is going to look like in 5 years. Nevertheless, corporations are still able to exercise significant amount of power in host countries, in African countries, even without the protection of investment law. Now, there are new EU laws on human rights due diligence, and I do welcome these new laws, but it is not enough. And we've heard today that it is not enough. There should be specific, legally binding measures that limit corporate power and hold corporations liable and accountable for human rights violations. This leads me to the second substantive issue, which is, of course, land. And as we've heard today, what's at stake behind land is not a question of just money and buying and selling. What is at stake is people's way of life, their relationship with each other, their relationship with the earth, with their ancestors, and with future generations. Since at least 2000, but really taking off during the last food crisis in 2007, a lot of investment in African countries ended up in large-scale land acquisitions. Investment, and especially foreign investment, creates a significant risk of dispossessing people from their land and making the rich grow richer. As it is widely recognized, small-scale food producers play an essential role in ensuring food security and nutrition today. Small-scale food producers produce approximately 70% of the world's food, yet they're the ones that face hunger, malnutrition, and socioeconomic insecurity. Small-scale food producers are not only farmers and peasants, but also fishers, pastoralists, and workers. Now, thankfully, there are existing frameworks that can help answer the question of how to support small-scale food producers, women, and youth, and answer the question how land should be governed. And we've heard this today. The EU is a supporter of the World Committee on Food Security, the CFS, and the EU has supported the CFS's guidelines for responsible governance of tenure of land, fisheries, and forests. This is more commonly known as the CFS tenure guidelines. And the CFS tenure guidelines are also widely supported by the private sector, civil society, and countries all over the world. And at the heart of the guidelines is recognizing the fact that land is a common good and not a commodity, as many noted at today's People's Summit. But there's also the African Land Governance Strategy. And I want to recognize the call that I've heard that national governments and civil society should be supported to implement the African Land Governance Strategy. This Made in Africa strategy will reduce land governance challenges on the continent. The implementation of the African Land Governance Strategy should be anchored by the African Charter on Human and People's Rights and by the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and Other Rural Peoples. With that, I'll now conclude with what a human rights framework looks like in general and the importance of agroecology. So at the heart of human rights is the power that people already have, as was exhibited today. This includes people's right to organize themselves in order to fully participate in the making of their own food system. At a specific level, everyone has the right to food that is always adequate, available, and accessible. More generally, human rights are about relationships. Human rights focus on the relationship between governments and people. In the end, a government is only as strong as its people. And the other relationship that is important is people's relationship to the environment. People are only as strong as the biosphere. One purpose of human rights is to ensure that every sector of the economy, every aspect of society serves and empowers those relationships, the government and the people and the environment. The key to human rights and the right to food specifically is that people are at the center of it all, not profits, not geopolitics. Markets should serve the people. And for too long, it has been the other way around, with people being forced to serve markets and serve transnational corporations. Or it has been governments focusing on enhancing their relationships to corporations. People must have as much control as possible over their own food system, over their own destiny. In turn, governments are obliged to create the conditions for all people to be able to gain, for people to have access to good, nutritious, affordable food with dignity now and in the future. Agroecology has proven to quickly lead to the tangible realization of the right to food, ensuring that communities and ecosystems flourish. Agroecology starts with the question of power dynamics. It frames the problem as an issue relating to access to knowledge and resources. From the perspective of agroecology and human rights, problems of food insecurity and malnutrition are problems created by whomever controls the food system. So part of agroecology includes a call to hold people, businesses, and governments accountable. Agroecology is also a scientific discipline that includes experimental knowledge with a focus on the ecology of agricultural environments. Its primary goal is to mimic ecological processes and biological interactions as much as possible. With this ecological knowledge, agroecology provides a way to design production methods based on assembling crops, animals, trees, soils, and other factors in schemes that are specific to each particular context. It allows peasants and farmers to generate their own soil fertility, crop protection, and productivity. As an agricultural practice, agroecology is labor intensive, and it encompasses a range of production techniques derived from local experience, from traditional experience, from the expertise of working with the land. Therefore, it heavily relies on the experience and the experiential knowledge, sometimes described as traditional knowledge. As a social movement, peasant agroecology acts as an important driver for strengthening social cohesion. It does this by gradually reducing social inequality and by promoting local governance and local sovereignty and empowering local communities. While a lot of new agricultural policy has recently recognized the importance of responding to the social and ecological dimensions of food production, for agroecology, it is a precondition that food producers, peasants, farmers, pastoralists, fishers enjoy secure access to biodiverse land, to water, and to natural resources. Now I'll turn to a common question sometimes people ask as to whether agroecology can feed the world. New research suggests that if we calculate productivity in terms of per hectare and not for a single crop, and if you measure productivity in terms of energy input versus output, agroecology is often more productive than industrial intensive techniques. Agroecology is also proving to be more resilient to climate change. In sum, I think agroecology is the way forward to increase biodiversity and restore carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus cycles. It is holistic in its approach, and agroecology does not separate the question of what is to be done from the questions of how it should be done and who should hold the power to do it. Public investment in agroecological approaches has been severely limited, estimated at between 1 and 1.5% of total agricultural and aid budgets. And it's not much different within the EU itself. Some donors, such as France, Germany, Switzerland, the Food and Agricultural Organization, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, and the CFS, have explicitly recognized agroecology as a key solution for building sustainable food systems, but they still do not devote significant resources to this idea. In some countries, such as Kenya and Senegal, continue to devote more resources to agroecological approaches at a national scale, and I hope that continues in more and more national governments in the African continent. In my own reports to the UN, I have focused on how agroecology can help us rethink our understanding of markets, how we can support markets so that commerce can serve people and the planet. In conclusion, agroecology is gaining popular support around the world. We've heard today how it is the key way forward, and this is because equity and justice is at the heart of agroecology. Just like every ecosystem is unique, every agroecological system is unique. And we can scale up agroecology if we support these practices everywhere on a local scale, but also make sure that different ecosystems are supporting each other on a regional scale and maybe even on a global scale. Agroecology takes care of the people who produce food. If we take care of our food producers, peasants, fishers, pastoralists, indigenous peoples, women, and workers, we are in effect supporting the people who take care of our ecosystems and who take care of us. Thank you very much. And congratulations again to everybody. Over back to you.